歡迎翻到嚟今日先歷正經嘅訪問系列啦。繼我哋上個月咧就訪問咗美國國家安全委員會嘅顧問同埋呢個 CrowdStrike 聯合創辦人 Dmitry Alpovich 之後，今個月咧我哋就訪問咗著名嘅中國研究學者黎安友。其實佢過去咧一直咧都係非常之重要嘅 China Hand 中國研究嘅專家嚟嘅。亦都做過 NED 即係呢一個美國民主基金會嘅董事局成員啦，亦都係呢一個人權機構人權觀察嘅即係顧問啦。現職咧，佢而家就喺哥倫比亞大學入邊咧就做呢個講座教授。其實佢喺我哋做中國研究嘅學說或者學界入邊咧係非常之出名同德高望重。個原因咧就因為當年佢嘅師從咧就係呢一個美國嘅漢學泰斗費正清出現咗之後咧，其實就一直好關注緊呢一個中國嘅研究幾十年。亦都係做過好多出名嘅書啦，包括就係天安門文件啦，亦都有好多唔同嘅關於中國嘅管治情況嘅理解同埋國際關係嘅理解。近排咧佢出咗本新書啊，嗰本新書咧就譯咗做台灣嘅中文版，咁就係呢一個中國威權之謎，從天安門到習近平嘅政治邏輯。呢本書咧就係有理文化，應該係上個月大概4月度咧先至係開售嘅，大家哋有興趣咧都係可以喺下邊嘅連結揾到。但係今日我哋講佢本書之前咧，其實最主要我哋訪問黎安友教授咧係探討一個喺漢學上面一直存在緊嘅問題嚟嘅。我哋其實去睇唔同嘅教授啦，都有講過話喂，中國嗰個民主化發展，如果我哋睇翻黎安友教授，佢其實佢年紀好非常之大嘅，40幾年嗰陣時出世，跟住你20零歲畢業，佢觀察住中國咧，佢觀察咗幾個年代，所以佢係由改革開放去到8964，再去到胡溫年代之前，仲有光緒年代嗰種嘅極端嘅全球化帶來嘅富有嘅收入。跟住，然後最突然嘅地方係啲邊度呢？就係我哋喺大概20即係開始習近平上台嘅時候呢，佢係打住一個改革派嘅旗號上台嘅。但係你發覺咧出現咗之後呢，佢係最進一步將權力收窄。今時今日你睇呢個中央軍委呢，都係得翻2個人嘅啫。一個係佢啊，基本上連張又俠都唔喺度。所以從呢個角度睇呢，係成個嗰個威權係收窄咗。呢一度呢，其實喺美國嘅漢學界或者西方嘅漢學界呢，一直都係存在住一個即係經典問題嘅，就係因為我哋隨住人類越嚟越或者我哋入邊嗰個國家嘅人啊，越嚟越富有嘅時候呢，通常係最驚嗰樣嘢就係你以前 nothing to lose，咁你有個君王喺度嘅時候，我理得你搞奴隸主義定封建主義啊，你幫我打翻嚟，咁我都仲解釋到喎，咁都起碼呢，你知道一開始點解會有集中制嘅集中權力喺度。但係個問題就係我哋經歷過喺光緒年代嘅改革開放嘅成果，再去到胡溫年代，因為全球化去到中國非常之發達唔係中國非常之發達，係中國人非常之發達。其實喺成個中國，如果講緊中產階級，即係大概你有1層樓以上嘅人啦，1層物業以上嘅人喺中國非常之多。又或者講緊即係都係喺北上廣深嘅居民啦，有少少積蓄啦有 something to lose 啦，嗰度講緊3億幾中產嘅。點解呢3億幾中產唔單止唔祈求將權力分散，起碼自己有政治權力保障自己得來不易的私人財產，反而其實我哋更加之係反其道而行呢，成為咗一個更集權嘅地方，然後將所有權力賦予俾一個人即係呢一個係一個習近平現時嗰個施政。我相信唔單止係黎安友教授諗唔到啦，亦都係成個美國學界，再加上中國好多學界咧，都覺得即係起碼有唔同嘅民主運動嘅出現。但係你發覺其實喺8964之後咧，你當改革開放嗰30年啦，咁其實你見唔到嗰個即係改革運動係大咗嘅。去到今日啦，經濟差翻嘅時候，究竟中國人佢哋會點樣諗咧？咁呢個中國威權之謎咧，我哋就不如聽下黎安友教授嘅訪問啦。So first of all, let me welcome Professor Nathan to share your views about the United States and China relations, and also your new books talking about the China regime, because the China regime, I think, is a long paradox and also quite a mystery to a lot of scholars. We have studies for many years. We have a lot of predictions on the democratization. Seems it is not clearly as we think about in the academic way. So first of all, let's welcome Professor Nathan to our show. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
And in the sight of this week, I think before we talk about the democratizations of China, I think we have to talk about Xi and Trump summit in this week. I think in the time of our recording, this is the day 1 or day 2 of these meetings, and seems its progress is quite well. The ambience and also the conversation and is quite warm. But underneath, there's a lot of tension between the United States and competition with China. So what do you think about this summit?
Yeah, I think that it's, first of all, the United States goes into the summit in a weak position. Trump goes in a weak position. The Chinese consider the United States the main threat to Chinese security. So their foreign policy is really focused on reducing American pressure. That includes the American, what they consider occupation of Taiwan, the American alliance system surrounding China, the American domination of the global economy, so on and so forth, American ideological hostility. So ever since the communist regime came to power in China, they've regarded the United States as a major security threat. And so that hasn't gone away. And with the rise of China, the United States has started to regard China as the main security threat to American interests. So those, what we might call structural conditions, are still there. But what's really new is that Trump has been destroying elements of American power, soft power, military power, diplomatic power, credibility of our alliance. And we're not competing with China really effectively in advanced technology, and most advanced technologies like green tech, like rare earths, like magnets, robots. The US is somewhat ahead in artificial intelligence, but that lead won't be permanent. So the US position is pretty weak. And the way that Trump goes into this summit really symbolizes the weakness. He's reduced the US agenda to trade agenda, investment agenda, to really secondary issues in terms of great power competition. So that's what I see. So the Chinese are taking advantage of that. They don't want to humiliate Trump in any way. They want to flatter him, so to keep their position of advantage growing.
I think that's a very good observation, talking about the narrowing of the agenda, because previously the leaders of the China and United States met. We talk about a lot on political side, national security and democratization and other international orders. But seems this round of Xi and Trump meetings is mostly around trade relations. So what do you think about it? Because when we talk about the trade competition, it is two market, or we can say two market, we can say these two system regime. One of them is a market economy and other of them is a planned economy. So what do you think the United States will achieve in this summit, or what they want to achieve to deal with the planned economy in China?
Well, apparently from what we've heard in the news, the summit is not very well prepared on the American side, but whatever preparation there is has been carried out by the Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, negotiating with Hu Lifeng. And I guess what Bessent wants to get is China's commitment to purchase more soybeans, more Boeing aircraft, and perhaps to invest in the United States. But this is, in terms of great power competition, this is small money. And even if the big issue is, can the United States begin to repair its trade deficit and its fiscal government debt? And nothing happening here is going to fix those things. We're continuing to have a big trade deficit. China's continuing to have a big trade surplus with the world. Nothing's going to change. The US doesn't have effective policies to deal with those problems.
So when we move on to the questions about the democratization, I think one question that we pops up in the Xi Jinping's and Trump's meeting is about the international orders. Right before this summit, I think there's Iran war, and also there's a lot of happenings in Venezuela. Seems that China and also other planned economy regime, authoritarian regime, are lined up against the international order, or what we call the Western order of democratization and also the market economy. Iran is a very good example of it. In these years, I think United States take a very direct approach to deal with this regime, such as Venezuela and also Iran. So what do you think? Do you think that United States has a better upper hand in this international order competition, or China is on the other way around, is helping out these not that democratized regimes?
Okay, so this is a sort of multi-question that you're asking here, but the Trump administration has really given up trying to promote democracy. It's not about democracy in Venezuela or in Iran. It's in the case of Iran, the idea was at one point was to overthrow the Iranian regime, not for democracy, but because of the nuclear weapons program and the other things, the Iranian support of proxy organizations and stuff like that. In Venezuela, obviously, the U.S. is happy with an authoritarian regime that is not threatening American interests and which is listening to orders from the United States. I think the same thing would be the case in Cuba. It's not really about democracy. In fact, the Trump administration is rolling back democracy even in the United States itself. And it's given up the instruments. When it comes to a country like China, the U.S. really has a very small ability to shape the evolution of the Chinese regime. But whatever instruments we had, the U.S. government is abandoning them. It's trying to defund the National Endowment for Democracy. It didn't succeed in defunding it this time around, but that's an annual fight. It tried to destroy the Voice of America and Radio Free Asia. It did destroy USAID. But most important, I think, in terms of the American role in democracy is whether the American system looks like a good system to people around the world, and right now doesn't, largely because of the Trump administration. But even before the Trump administration, if you look at Biden or Obama, the US system looks paralyzed because of the polarization of the two political movements, the progressive movement and the MAGA movement. And it's hard for decisions to be made in the United States and to be upheld over the course of several different administrations. So when it comes to something like green energy, which is the sort of one of the key technologies for the 21st century, the United States, even before Trump, was not competing effectively in this area. So if the international system is democracy, the US is really not promoting it effectively. If the international system, as you mentioned, is market system, that's what the US says is the international system, but there's no law that says that that's the international system. And although the Chinese economic system has some real problems, but basically, when it comes to the tech competition in particular, whether it's green energy, whether it's robotics, whether it's bioengineering and so forth, the Chinese system is actually ahead in most areas, not in AI necessarily, but the gap between the US and China in AI is very small.
So when we talk about this, I think it comes to a very long tradition of United States that we have a kind of a system of changing the regimes, other countries' regime to become more democracy-like. For example, we have NDI, and at the same time, we have another agency in the Republic Party is similar to that. I think it's a
IRI.
yeah.
Yeah, so there's NDI and IRI, and then there's also the NED and the labor thing called Solidarity Center and the business thing called CIPE, the Center for International Private Enterprise. So you have these 5 units that are part of what's called the NED family.
So United States have already give up this kind of strategy of democratize other country, or we still have this kind of national goal?
So when you say the United States, when you say China, that means what is Xi Jinping's policy? When you say what is the policy of the United States, it's more complicated because you have the president and you have the Congress and you have various government agencies and so on. So when it comes to the NED, the administration under Trump tried to zero out the NED, make it disappear. And they failed. The NED survived for 1 year. And then we'll see what happens next year. But I would say that the major signal comes out of the White House. And from the major signal, then the answer to your question is yes, the United States has basically given up on those instruments that are used to try to promote democracy.
But this kind of a puzzle, because when I learned in politics and political science, I think this is one of the long belief that when there is a democracy coming up in a developed country, so that there will be less war, more civilized, and also more keen to market economy. So that's why the United States and also the Western world have developed a lot of human rights agency, NGOs promoting democracy. This is what we have learned. So if we give up this kind of strategy now, do we still believe that China should have democracy? Or we give up this dream already?
So again, it's a question of who is we in this in your question.
Yeah.
So starting with the people in China, do they believe that China should be a democracy? And of course, we don't really know the answer to this question because there's many different views in China, but it seems as though the majority of people living in China today are not pushing for change in the regime. We could talk about why that is, but part of it probably they're afraid to push for it, and probably they don't want to rock the boat, and probably it depends on which Chinese person you're talking about. Then if we look at something like the American administration, the White House, the State Department, are they putting any kind of real effort behind trying to influence China's political system? I would say that they are not putting an effort. Then if we look at the US Congress, there are still quite a few people in the US Congress who think that China's regime is dangerous and it should be reform in some way. In what way? Overthrow the Chinese Communist Party, have free election, or what? That's another question. I think the narrow agenda would be something like human rights. Let Jimmy Lai out of jail. Let other people, Xu Zhiyong, out of jail. Let the Christians in China have freedom of worship and so forth. It doesn't mean overthrowing the Chinese Communist Party in that case. So congressional agendas would probably be focused on these human rights issues. Then there's the human rights movement in the United States, which really does want human rights in China. And then there's the Haiwai Minyun, the overseas, the Chinese people living overseas who are pro-democracy, who really want democracy in the broad sense in China, which is more than human rights. It's also a change in the structure of the political system. So, I mean, some people have given up on that. Some people have not given up on that. And it's a lot of different actors in the picture.
Before we talk about the the China people in the China, I think we talk about the United States first, especially when we talk about the think tank academia. I know the White House in these years, they have different agenda about the China democratization and also the progress. Maybe it depends on the election. But I think a lot of ideas is coming from the think tank and academia. When I'm in university, talking about China is ultimate goal is democratization. So what is the academia? Are they shaking the ideology now?
Well, even academia, I mean, I'm sorry to be so analytical about this, and I resist generalizing too much.
Yeah, sure.
But in academia, if you're thinking about people who study China, so China specialists in academia, there's really a big debate going on about analyzing the Chinese system. Is it in trouble? Is it in economic trouble? Has the growth rate stalled out? Is China investing a lot of state money and getting low productivity and stuff like that? And therefore the system is in trouble, versus another analysis that says the system is very stable. Now, if you ask people, okay, never mind your analysis, what do you want from China? Do you want China to change? Then I think most China specialists in the United States would say, yes, I would like China to change. I would like to be able to do research in China. I would like to be able to visit my friends in China and not get them in trouble. I'd like a much freer system. I'd like a rule of law system. I'd like to feel safe. I don't want to think that when I go to China, I'm being surveilled and maybe might even be detained if for example, if you're an ethnic Chinese US citizen, the Chinese still think, hey, you're Chinese, I can arrest you. That's their maybe private opinion of a lot of academics, personal opinion. But from an analytical point of view, many of them are quite pessimistic, as I am, about the likelihood that China will change. In the think tanks, American think tanks have a political character, right? Some of them are more in the conservative wing, some are in the more, Democratic Party, progressive, liberal wing. And more or less a similar debate goes on in the think tanks. The think tanks are more policy oriented, as you know. So the think tanks do regard China, a rising China, as a threat to the inherited American position as the dominant global power. And then they'll study about, is it a technology threat? Is it a threat to the dominance of the US dollar in international trade? Is it a fentanyl threat? Is it a threat to Taiwan? So they're going to analyze those things. And yes, they would largely wish that the Chinese regime would be more friendly, cooperative, would not challenge American dominance in the world. And as you said, there is a long-standing view that if the Chinese regime were democratic, it would be more cooperative with the United States. I actually don't even think that's true, because I think any regime in China is going to regard the US as they're going to have the view that either the US dominates the global system and has some kind of control over us, or we're going to be strong enough to be secure and not let the United States threaten our security, even if we're a democracy. So that I use the word structural. I think that the competition between these two countries is is not about ideology. It's really structural. Ideology is part of it, but even if you change the ideology, the competition is still there.
When you talk about the structural assumption, I think one of the good debate talking about China regime is China stable nowadays? I think it's one of the very important assumption of it. But when we talk about when we all study in the China studies, when it has become growing into a superpower and an economic power because there's lack of democracy and the middle class will rise out, and we say we have to get more power so that even though it's not democracy, the power will become more diversified. But it turns out the world turns out another round. It turns out to become like a mouse regime nowadays. So when I think these two, the question is the same. Is it stable or is it why is turnaround? I think the outcome is the same, is by putting the analysis on what's the middle class think about. So what do you think of why we predict wrong in this way? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we did predict wrong, but so there's two questions. What is the role of the middle class right now? And I think that the middle class, which is of course a huge class, right? So it depends on your definition, but it's maybe 300 million, 400 million people, ranging from very, very wealthy people who run businesses and have a lot of private wealth down to people who are living in cities and apartments and have an automobile and have, an education. And so it's a big class. But I think that this class of people is still a minority in the Chinese population. So that's one factor. And they think if you have a democracy, we actually are still we're a big group, but we're a minority. Secondly, they have private property that they don't want to lose. And so they're afraid of political disorder of some kind. Third, they are living a pretty good life, better than their parents' life. And so they are not really interested in trouble. They would like stability. And finally, they understand that the regime, the police system, the surveillance system, the Communist Party system is very strong. And if they all rose up at once, if 300 million people rose up, sort of like Tiananmen 1989, but even bigger, they could threaten the regime. But you don't rise up at once. It takes some people to start rising up, and those people get arrested right away. So the regime's ability to suppress is a final factor among the others that I mentioned that's keeping the middle class conservative, most of them, rather than, revolutionary. So that seems to be the situation. Why did we not understand that in the past, including myself? I think basically we underestimated the resiliency of the Chinese Communist Party regime. We saw the regime having internal factions, including a reform faction. We saw the regime at one point seeming to want to model itself more on the Western economic system, including legal reform and so on. We saw them seemingly losing faith in their own ideology. We didn't expect Xi Jinping to be what he turned out to be. We thought he was a reformer. So we made a mistake. So, including myself. I blame mostly other people, but I also was one of them.
I think a lot of people who are observing and reporting China we all predict wrong when Xi Jinping turns up. He's a reformist. He opened up more like the predecessor, but seems it is not. So this turned out to be a very interesting prediction and also discussion. That's when we invest and also we have a lot of power putting on in China. So we we're thinking that this kind of investment, no matter in well-formed and also in cultural engagement, I know that United States have a lot of cultural engagement program between the elite in China and also in United States. We're trying to make a very good reform force and try to make the system better or more westernized than it was. Do you think they are still the reformists in China, or they are become a conservatives or become a resilient force that structurally strengthen the CCP regime?
So we don't really know if there is a reformist faction or group or thought stream of thought in the Communist Party. We don't see it. And that could be because we see some Chinese professors and think tank people to recommend things like increasing domestic demand or increasing the rule of law, the predictability of rule of law. And even Xi Jinping with his anti-corruption campaign it's a kind of reform as well. But in terms of a faction with any influence in the party or in Chinese academia that says we need to diffuse power, we need to reduce the domination of one man, nobody says that. And it could be because they're afraid to say it, or it could be because they think the system is working now in the interests of China. It basically works. We have somebody who is guiding the country in the correct way. But it does seem pretty clear that in the real power structure level, say the top 100 people, it looks like they really do support the current system. So in the 1980s, when you had a reform faction that was in the high level of the regime, I don't see a reform faction in the high level of the regime today. And then there's 100 million party members. Maybe some of those people below the top level have other ideas. They probably do, but we don't know who they are and what they think.
So that's quite strange to me because if we take a look at the historical in the Soviet Union, that's in the top level, there's still some reformists. And also even though they are not going to be a reform or they don't want to diversify the power, they are against to make it more a single power, single one-man party because it will become extremely unstable and also it threaten others. Just like when Xi Jinping appoints a lot of ministers in this 10 or 5 years, all this kind of minister was gone at court because of any rules and some laws. But what do you think about that? Why that happens why those elite are supporting one-man parties rather than a collective system?
So human nature, there should be a lot of people that are jealous of Xi Jinping and afraid of Xi Jinping and want to find a way to gang up on Xi Jinping and weaken him. That's human nature. But where's the evidence of that? Well, maybe the purge of Zhang Youxia, people like this, that could be evidence. But we don't know whether Zhang Youxia challenged the power of Xi Jinping. There's so many scenarios of why was Zhang Youxia purged. Was it that he challenged Xi Jinping? Was it that he told Xi Jinping something that Xi Jinping didn't want to hear? Was it that he said to Xi Jinping, we're not ready to attack Taiwan? Was it actually corruption? Was it that Zhang Youxia was arguing with Miao Hua and others, and they had a disagreement and factional strife, and Xi Jinping said, I don't want you guys to... We don't know what was going on. So it's reasonable to speculate. For example, Wu Guoguang believes that there are really factions, power faction struggles in the Chinese leadership. It's a reasonable speculation, but the evidence to me is not there. And so then your question is, how is that possible? And it's a great question. How was Mao possible to control that much power? How is Xi Jinping able to control that much power? It's really hard to explain. but I think it's a combination of promoting his own people, surveilling everybody else to prevent them from combining against him, and his performance as a leader, which is that there are some mistakes, but pretty much under Xi Jinping, China's power has increased in the world, and it has managed its economy, and it has succeeded in the achieving a lot of technological advancement. And so I think many of the people around Xi Jinping have the view that, hey, this is working actually. And so we could ask the same question about Trump, and it's even more striking that anybody, in my opinion, it is incredible that anybody, let's say Scott Bessent, who's a smart person, would support Trump. Why does Trump has as much power as he has? So I suppose as a political scientist, it would be my job to be able to answer that question, but I really can't.
It might take time, but you have mentioned a very interesting point about performance. I think in the few decades ago, when we talk about the China legitimacy and the CCP legitimacy, we think about a lot of things. It turns out one of the quite accepted theory about the CCP legitimacy is the performance legitimacy, because in the last 30 years, the Chinese economy is growing so good. Although CCP may not be a transitional power, may not be democratized, they don't have election, but the performance gives them the legitimacy to rule China for 30 years or 40s. But turns out in these few years, the economy stalled, and also sometimes the private consumption is really dropping. Young people are getting unemployed. Do you think this kind of economic crisis will lead people to question the legitimacy of CCP?
Yes, if the crisis gets worse than it is now. I think so. We don't know what is the economic growth in China. So China says it's 4.5 or 5%. Some other people, for example, Xu Changgang at Stanford says it's 0%. And we don't really know the answer to that. 5% is not that bad, actually, for a big mature economy. But then there's the question of distribution, and so some people in China are very wealthy, some young people can't find jobs. There's a lot of dissatisfaction in this regard. I do agree that a big economic collapse would damage the legitimacy of the CCP, but then they still have their repressive apparatus, which is very advanced, very high tech, many police, many facial recognition cameras, many combined records of each individual's online activity, and so forth. So yes, I think it would take a bigger economic crisis in China than we have now for the CCP to be seriously challenged.
If we project the end game is not the fall of CCP, but just more democratized or maybe a losing power of Xi Jinping himself, do you think that the economic crisis nowadays is threatening the Xi Jinping leadership?
I don't. So it's very rare for the Chinese leadership to interrupt somebody's term of office as the high leader, because this would be a huge crisis. And the question is, something I've already discussed, is who is there in the top leadership who could gather other people together and say, we got to get rid of Xi Jinping. As soon as you do that, Xi Jinping gets a report. Everybody knows this, from the person's secretary, from the person's bodyguards, from the person's surveillance equipment saying, Zhang San is holding meetings with Li Si to have off the record conversations about you. Nobody can do that. But I also don't think that in the top leadership, I mean, if Zhang Youxia didn't want to do it or wasn't able to do it, who can do it? Tsai Chi is going to do this. I mean, so I don't see now Xi Jinping. I don't see anybody carrying out a coup d'état against Xi Jinping. And if they did do so, they would have a hard time consolidating their own power, because then there would be factional power struggle. So now, also, when you say it's not the overthrow of the Chinese Communist Party, but it's some kind of, let's say, liberalization. What do we mean by that? And what we mean by that is that the top people, the top few people are saying, okay, we're going to give more power to, let's say, the lawyers in our country. We're going to give more power to let the lawyers defend their defendants, the political defendants. We're going to let the professors talk freely more, let them say more things. We're going to let the students organize. We're going to let the workers have independent trade unions. So the lesson of Tiananmen, I think, for the leadership was, as soon as you do that, it's chaos. We can't even govern the country anymore. Everybody has too many demands. Look at the United States. Everybody has too many demands. Nothing works. And if we do that, we're going to weaken our country. And the United States and its allies are going to take advantage of us. That's their thinking. So I really don't see people in the power structure, because we don't care about the people outside of the power structure. They're not going to make something happen. I don't see people inside the power structure that are saying we need more diffusion of power. We need to limit our own power by letting other people have more power. I don't think they believe that. Now, we have an argument, you and I, educated in Western political science, and we have this great argument: more diffusion of power, more creativity, more individual freedom. Market allocates resources and it's more productive than the state allocating resources, and it's a better system. They just don't believe that.
So when you talk about this, then we talk to another question about the Cold War. This is an old debate that there is two regimes. One of them is the Western regime, one of them is Soviet regime. And in 1990s, the democratic regime wins. And the human history think that that was the final answer to the political science. But after these discussions and interview, we think that might be quite stable for the CCP system nowadays. Is it another Cold War question against that? Is the Western system right, or the China system might be the answer to human society?
I don't think the China system is very easy to be adopted around the world. It's really an unusual system. It seems that kind of a system seems to basically work okay in Vietnam and in China. It doesn't work too well in Cuba. It doesn't work too well in North Korea. I mean, it works in North Korea, but it's a very bad system. I mean, it's not a
superpower. It's not a very good economic power.
Yeah. So, but if you think, how could we have like a Chinese type of system in Pakistan, for example? I mean, I don't think they are capable of having it. Or, in India, you have Modi. It's a more and more authoritarian system, but I don't think it'll ever be a Chinese type of. So I don't think I think maybe the idea that there's one type of system that's best for everybody was a wrong idea to begin with. And we're going to see, actually, I mean, from a very high academic point of view, I would have probably the point of view that no system is good. No political system is really good because it's all about power. It's all about me controlling you or you controlling me. It's not a good system, and it's never stable forever. It's a power struggle. Right now, Xi has this power struggle under control, but he's not going to live forever. So the normal state of affairs in China, in Pakistan, in the United States is power struggle. It's bad, but it's normal.
Yeah. So I think one of the final questions about in this interview is about what next in China. So what is your prediction or maybe your hope about the freedom and democracy in China in the next decades or maybe the next 5 years?
Hope. Well, hope and prediction are two different things in my mind. I have so many Chinese friends, and some of them are pro-democracy people, Minyun Funza, and some of them are just, my students, my former students, people like that who are not Minyun. And what I would hope for them is what you and I have been talking about is more rule of law, more openness, more academic freedom, more media freedom, more of a less surveillance from the regime. But my prediction is pessimistic for the time being. And a lot of it depends on Xi Jinping, because you raised this point of how has Xi Jinping been able to consolidate so much power, and we don't know, but apparently he has done it somehow, and he continues to do it. He's 73 years old. We don't know what his health is, but there are always rumors about it, but it seems like he's continuing on and aiming toward a fourth term in office, 20 years of Xi Jinping government. Sooner or later, he either gets sick or he simply retires or he dies, or we don't know. At that point, my prediction becomes pessimistic in the following sense, that I think it'll be hard for anybody else to consolidate that much power. And there will be a power struggle. And there may be somebody who comes to office and stays in office but doesn't have as much power as Xi Jinping, so the policy becomes less consistent and less orderly. Xi Jinping's policies are quite orderly. And so China will begin to change again. Every country changes. I was one of the people in the 1990s, and I thought it's the end of history and so forth. But now I'm getting older, and I see that the change is constant. China will change. The United States will change. Every place is changing. And probably it's not a good thing.
But I think it's still we need to have hope. So change
yes,
is
I
good.
have hope.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm glad that we all have hope.
So
And I must say that the people who make change are also including those people, the human rights advocates, the Minyun people who keep the prospect alive of an alternative that's better for everybody. They need to keep struggling for that.
So thank you. I think this is all of the interview questions that I have come across. And also I think that is a very fruitful discussion about the regime. We're not talking about politics, that who is Trump and Trump is doing what or doing right or wrong, but we are talking about, I think in a human sense, that talking about why CCP and why Xi Jinping comes in power. I think we can learn more about it not only in this interview but also in your new book. I think it's translated newly in Chinese, so that we can share the links and also the book's introduction in the below. So thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for your good questions and continuing the struggle.
Thank you.